Hello, welcome to this panel discussion as part of the GovComms Festival. My name's Nicole Thompson-Pride and I'm an Australian speechwriter. I've written speeches for Prime Ministers, other federal government ministers, high-profile government leaders and CEOs. And I'm joined today by Professor Selena Bartlett from the Queensland University of Technology. So I'll let Selena introduce herself because she's a very impressive woman. Selena?
Thank you. I'm Professor Selena Bartlett. I run a neuroscience lab. I've been studying the brain for 25 years around the world. I ran a lab at University of California, San Francisco for 12 years. And then I returned to Australia in the last 8 years. So my whole kind of expertise is on how the brain works and specifically on the revolution that's underway in neuroplasticity and how we can understand and empower ourselves to understand how our brain works so we can improve the lives of people. And I'm really excited to be here today on this festival, as I think it couldn't be more timely situation that we've found ourselves in around the world, and how we need to, as people, start to improve our ways of communicating so we can rehumanize the world.
Great, thank you for that introduction. I'm equally as excited. I think neuroscience and communication marry very well together and are very important to progress issues and ideas. I think communicators need to understand neuroscience to progress the complex issues that we're facing. I think as communicators, just because neuroscience is yet to make its way into our communication textbooks doesn't mean that it doesn't belong there. As Professor Bartlett is saying, it is critically important to rehumanize communication and progress many of the complex issues that we're facing. I believe, in the years ahead, neuroscience will absolutely underpin good communication. So through this panel discussion, we hope that you'll gain an understanding of the brain's reward and threat system and how it impacts rational decision-making and what that means for governments, leaders, speechwriters and communication advisors. I'm also going to ask Professor Bartlett how understanding neuroscience can help us better bring people together. And the last topic I want to discuss with the professor is, what does responsible messaging from governments and leaders sound like as we head into 2021? So let me start by taking you back to March this year. Here in Australia, we were watching scary events unfold all around the world. Friends, family and colleagues that were overseas were telling us this coronavirus sweeping the world was bad. It was really bad. Restrictions started to come in and shut down life as we knew it. One by one, we watched the things that we love to do and the places we love to visit get turned off. It's fair to say we were worried. We were really worried and, rightly so. And our fear was most evident on the bare supermarket shelves, in particular, the toilet paper aisle. Toilet paper became the hottest commodity on the planet. There were fights in the aisles. Security guards were brought in to manage crowds. People were auctioning off toilet paper at obscene prices. It was bizarre and bewildering. But for people that understand neuroscience, it was perhaps less bewildering, because acting so irrational, so nonsensical, when we feel scared and threatened and stressed, is actually a perfectly normal human response. It can be explained by what neuroscientists call the reward and threat system. I was first introduced to the reward and threat system a few years ago, and for me, it was just such an aha moment. I remember thinking, how does every leader, every speechwriter, every communicator around the world not already know about this? Understanding the reward and threat system, in my opinion, is just absolutely paramount in being able to work with humans and influence people and progress, the complex issues facing the world today. So this is the perfect point to hand over to you, Professor, because this is your area of expertise. Can you explain to us, why did we hoard toilet paper? What happens to our brains when we feel stressed and threatened and scared?
So I want to start by saying that we're in a very pivotal moment in our history in Australia. And each of us listening to this podcast around the world has a choice about how they live their life. You can use your life for good purposes, or you can use your life for bad purposes. And at the moment, we have that choice. And the reason I joined the podcast today is because of this very pivotal moment. Australia has never faced, or the world has never faced, a moment like this in history. And because of the way the brain is wired over millions of years of evolution, when you speak about the reward and threat system, what you're speaking about is the fact that no one's been taught how their brain works. We all think that the brain is some very deep problem that's outside our control. And for 7,000 years, we've kind of been right about that. But the advances in neuroscience, brain imaging, and genomics technology have far outstripped the textbooks. And so as communicators and people listening to this, if you care about our world, if you care about becoming human again, instead of just acting on your animal instincts, which most of us tend to do under stress, it is our responsibility as governments to rehumanize the world. Technology companies, and without meaning to, have basically changed our world without meaning to. And so they've worked out that threat system, and so has the media. The media and social media have worked out how to hack our psychology to tap into our threats. So the reason that we hoard toilet paper is specifically we just are acting on our animal instincts of foraging and accumulating toilet paper. That's one example, but I could give you many examples. It's about trying to buy 1 million houses when you only need one to live in. And so therefore propping up property prices and leaving many people out on the cold and homeless. That does not make sense from a human perspective. So I think this has got a lot of deep questions, but I would like to use our time together for us to sit back and become humans again. We don't have to do what the technology tells us to do. And this came very clear to me only in the last month, because I thought that once people understood that what they were doing, they would stop and rethink. But no, as we've seen what's happening and unfolding today in America, is a very great example of animal instincts under threat and how people know how to tap into that psychology. So to counter that, to become more human, requires such a significant break in us working out how to use social media for good.
Yeah, I was quite surprised when I learned about the threat and reward system, that when we feel threatened or stressed or scared, and what makes us feel stressed, threatened or scared is actually quite broad. It's not necessarily an existential threat or a threat to our life. Like, it's quite broad what can make us feel that way. But I was quite surprised to learn that when that happens, blood and oxygen is actually diverted from the prefrontal cortex, which, that's where rational decision-making happens.
Absolutely.
That's higher order thinking happens.
But to step back from that, like, you understand that and I understand it very well. But the thing I've come to realize since coming out of my lab to give these lectures around the world about this system, which is, you can call it reward and threat, but there's a very specific brain circuit that anyone can understand if they're shown how. But the problem is that people have not been shown how this works.
Absolutely.
And so because the brain has been hidden away in our skull for so long, but now we have technology to demonstrate reward and threat. Yes, the amygdala. Yes, the prefrontal cortex. But if I use those words, even still, I've discovered that people run away from that thinking it's still science, and who cares about that? But as a consequence, all of these systems have been set up as interventions. So people have made up a lot of models to make up for this. And so the problem for where we sit in neuroscience and why it's going to be a revolution is that we're missing a number of factors, and that is brain science is missing across the whole of the sector. That's mental health, education, communications, business, you name it, neuroscience. There's a common language and no one has it. So you understand it because you were fortunate to meet up with this model that you were talking about, reward and threat. But really, honestly, it's just the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex. And these things are not two-dimensional. Each of us have a different one. So some people are hoarding toilet paper, some people aren't. They know that there's going to be ample toilet paper. They know there's going to be ample food in Australia, and they just sitting back in like, what is going on? Now, what's the difference driving that is because of the difference in people's brains and how it's been wired over multiple generations. So if you're in a certain situation in your life, because you're not born a blank slate. And so that threat system in each people's brain is really different.
You're right.
And so the social media has worked this out. And if anyone watched the Social Dilemma documentary, has demonstrated this. So people that have started technology companies for good, hoping to democratize information, anything that you start can also have a bad consequence. And so they've recognized that now, and they do not let their children touch social media. So this is where we're up to in some sense. So now that we understand that, now what do we do about it? And this is where the government communication system matters, because governments are not social media companies, even though they're using them. We can now adjust our communication strategies, and I know this is what you're interested in, Nicole, and doing, to make our world a better place. Because if we keep going down this pathway, you can see that the world is becoming incredibly polarized, and that bad actors have come in to make that happen, and people have no clue. And they think that their voting, counts, and it's not really. So I think this reward and threat system, and then teaching people that that they're all acting the same way under stress is one of the most important things that we can teach people through this platform, basically.
Is it correct to say a leader or a government department is going in to give a speech about climate change, or, an issue that just the very mention of it can make people from two different sides with two different opinions feel stressed and threatened, then is it correct to say that it doesn't matter how strong the facts and figures are, how horrifying the statistics are, how compelling the case studies, that the audience is not in the right state of mind to work together to come up with rational solutions, because our brain is working essentially against us in that state of feeling stressed and threatened. Is that correct?
Yes, that's exactly right. So, and that's why these platforms work so well, right? So just to get likes or whatever, it's the same thing. You just know which words to use. For example, I think it's very clear right now. People know exactly how to get likes. They know exactly what language to use in the titles of pieces that they're putting out. And this is what the government communications is fighting against. And it's very difficult. So basically, the way the brain processes sight, sound, smell, basically is at millisecond rates. So all you have to almost do is mention the word climate, and people already have an opinion, when climate is just, rain and sunshine. But it's been now manipulated. And I would say also, as we're talking in this kind of place about the brain and brain health, mental health has done the same thing. You just have to mention the word mental health, and people immediately have an opinion about not talking about it. And so this is why we've got to be so careful with how around language and communication, because that's how our brain's been wired, is to just always look for threat first. That's its number one goal, is to keep us safe from threats.
Look, we definitely need some longer term strategies, which is like some of the research you're working on, and we'll get to that in a moment. But first up, for the communicators out there listening, what advice can you give? So going back to Aristotle is, common every communicator knows about Aristotle. He's in just about every single speech writing book. So, he lived about 300 odd years before Christ. So, in other words, a very long time ago. But remarkably, he spoke of 3 appeals that leaders could use to persuade an audience. So he spoke of pathos, which is the emotional appeal, so language, body language, voice. He spoke of logos, which was the rational appeal, to the intellect and rational thinking. And then he spoke of ethos, which is essentially, in a nutshell, the speaker's reputation. So what we're saying of those 3 appeals, if an audience is feeling quite threatened, logos, the rational appeal, isn't going to work. Can leaders, in the short term, can we draw on emotional appeal to make an audience feel less threatened about an issue, so we can have a constructive conversation at that moment in time? I know to progress issues on a much larger scale, we need a longer term strategy, but in the immediate, if you're about to front a room and they're feeling threatened about an issue, can we draw on some, emotional appeal, our body language, that kind of stuff, to make them feel less threatened?
Yes. So I can answer that in 3 ways. Truth, integrity, and morals always win in the long run. And so that will always be, if you are that person, people know that straight away. And we need that more than ever. And that's the greatest emotional appeal, because you make people feel safe. And humans are incredibly good for their safety at detecting people that are of high integrity, morals, and ethics. And I can't think of a better time in history for us as in this government communications sector to be relying not on our ego, but to be caring about the people we're representing. And so I believe that if we can help people feel safe to have morals, ethics, and deliver truth and transparency to the people they're governing, that will make people feel safe in the short term, immediately. And at the moment, we've lost that capacity for people to believe in their leaders. And that's something that never happened in history in the same way it has happened right now. And that's why I'm speaking to you, Nicole, from my heart about the reason why this has happened is driven by social media, and it's driven by them hacking. So you talk about people not realizing. Well, the problem is they have realized. And what people are doing now has never happened in history before, because social media and other platforms and media have worked out how to hack people's worst nature. Now, for us to come back from this situation so we can save the world, because honestly, the human species only has a very short time left to save itself. So you can mention climate science or climate change, it doesn't matter. The nature will always heal itself. So, but if you're really serious about what we're doing here in this communications festival, we don't have long. And technology does not have to rule us. We are not animals, we are humans, and we can recognize this in ourselves, and it's not too late. But the leadership is critical.
I was just about to say, leaders and governments have a great responsibility, especially when we understand mirror neurons. So I remember hearing once about the smile test, and, they've done this test all around the world. And if you're told not to smile and someone is smiling at you, 80% of people within 7 seconds will smile back, because the brain is scanning the environment and it is drawing subconsciously how it should feel. Like they've also done.
So can I just say, it's not subconscious. It's this part of the brain is very physical. It's in the front part of the brain. It's not subconscious. It's absolutely conscious. So this is the bit where we get so confused in the language. So there's a very specific pathway in the brain, in the front part of the brain, and this is the human part that we can train, control, and help our people feel safer, because people mirror and copy your behavior. So if you're acting like an animal, then everyone you're governing is going to become an animal.
And they've proven this with research around the airport. If people look anxious, everyone else starts to feel anxious.
Exactly.
So leaders really need to take stock of their leadership and what they're putting forward. And they really do. They really are in this unique opportunity to help people change how they feel about the world right now.
And do you not mind if we speak a little bit about March? Because I was quite impressed in parts of March with some of the leadership that was taking place in our country and around the world, to be honest. I was quite surprised, knowing everything I know, that people were putting vulnerability and death above business and economy. That really shocked me, and I was very grateful to see that. I'm sure it shocked many people. Like, people did that. The leaders did that. That was pretty, and knowing our economy was going to be put on freeze, or God knows what was going to happen. We still don't really know, do we?
We still don't really know.
But so that was very impressive, to be honest. And I think that led to a lot of reasons why people that took a strong leadership position on keeping people safe end up getting re-elected or whatever. And then you can see what people do when they do the opposite of something like that. And then you put people in this horrible situation. And so I think that, on a good note, I don't want to pan all the leadership, because I think some of it has been really good in the sense, and that's what I'm talking about. When you're putting people before yourself and economy, people are shocked because they don't expect that anymore. But so we have such a great opportunity to, I'm really serious. Like, Australia's about to face the biggest mental health challenge it's ever faced, ever. And as an Australian, and I'm also an American, but as an Australian, I think each of us, and that's why I'm on this festival with you, each of us have a responsibility to help when we know that there's an opportunity for us to help each other, like as a post-World War II effort. And brain health, and us talking about this reward and threat system, whether it's in government communications or whether it's within your own family, we need to do something right now to flatten the pending mental health crisis that's coming by mid-2021. Is not going to be pretty for Australia unless we do these kind of ways of communicating to people to make them feel safe and understand that we're all going through things.
And we are going to get, because I think that's really important, so we are going to get to responsible messaging in 2021. But before we do, let's just take a step back to that, to leadership. And, I want to ask you about how we can draw on neuroscience to better bring people together. But first, I want to share a story because, to try and help people, see this in a different light. So when I was in high school, I was a finalist in a school mediation competition. So the aim of the competition was for students to role play and mediate issues, and high schools from New South Wales, Queensland and Victoria all took part. When I was in year 10 at the state final in New South Wales, I was fortunate enough to meet Sir Lawrence Street. So for our international audience, Sir Lawrence Street was a highly regarded judge in Australia. So he put a coin between me and another student, and he said to me, "Tell me what you see." And I said heads. And then he asked the other student the exact same question. And of course, they said tails. And he said, "Well, who's right and who's wrong?" And he said our job as a mediator was to get both parties to understand that there's two sides to the one coin. Now, leaders might not naturally think of themselves as mediators, but they actually kind of are, because it's a leader's responsibility to bring his or her people together. And right now, I think that story is important because right now issues are so polarizing. Divisions run deep, society's fractured. It feels like battle lines have been drawn and you're either on one side or the other. You're either looking at heads or you're looking at tails. And we can't progress issues if we don't start to understand each other. So how can communicators, governments and leaders draw on neuroscience to start to create more understanding and, a relationship between its people where we can progress these issues, where we aren't, it's not so opposing. We're not on one side or the other.
Okay, so can we really please have this conversation? The leaders are under threat because of social media.
So you're talking about making popular decisions. Is that what
I'm talking about they're not making decisions, but they're playing into technology, telling them what people are liking and not liking, and that's hacked their own psychology. And they have no concept that their psychology has been hacked by these companies that are not meaning to do that. But because we've got 24/7 case numbers from COVID-19, unemployment, all of these negative messages, the leaders are getting that too. And they've got all their advisors telling them, don't say this because that's not liked there.
Yes.
Don't say this. This did not happen until the last 5 years.
And I think 2020 has been good that we have seen more unpopular decisions and conversations happen because they were the right conversations and the right decisions.
Yes.
But
so can I just say the COVID-19 pandemic has opened a window for us to make a change, for us to sit back and realize that we have capacity as humans to make a difference in what and not let this way of become human and take a chill pill and step back and not work on your ego, but step back to see, am I making a rational decision here, or am I just being led into just saying things I don't believe just because I'm going to get more likes so I can get reelected, because our election cycles are so fast now. Like, it's going to take a very strong leader to step back and take the people first over these rapid decisions, because the media and the way it's playing into the amygdala is always in constant threat like it's never been before.
And there is research, isn't there? Like there's research saying if your phone is even just near you, then your stress levels are higher.
Yes, definitely. So understand that we've been hacked.
So our modern technology has hacked our brain, which
and
is...
the leaders.
Everyone.
Everyone.
The leaders, everyone.
Like if you go to anywhere in Australia, any airport now, and especially in America, every member of the family.
So what's the first step? What's the first step we take?
Is what you do in the morning is to become an inside leader of yourself first.
Okay.
So our strongest leaders are taking care of their own neuroscience first. Because unless you are in charge of your brain, everyone else is going to be in charge of it for you. So you're always going to be reacting under pressure. And the more pressure you have, the more you're going to be reacting super, super fast. And you're going to be trying to make rational decisions, but you can't, because the human part of your brain's been switched off. And all you have to do is think about yourself. And me, I was hacked many times in this way, and I never thought of it like that. But now I've had a good period to sit back and see what's happening in our society. And I'm like, how did this happen? It's never happened in history before. We could always at least agree in democracy that we would come together in the middle at some point, because we had to, because it's a country where it's not like two separate things. And that's because we were led down this pathway by being hacked. And people have not got that concept, except if you watch other people that have worked this out in social, if you watch The Social Dilemma, for example, that's a great way to get into this. Or if you think about it at a high level, why would we want our species to die?
Yeah. So
this is how... a very short time to turn this around. And equally, in the brain, no one knows how their brain works. So that's why we can get hacked.
And I feel, as a communicator, as a speechwriter, someone that advises leaders, I actually feel great responsibility to understand this, because I feel like as a communicator, our whole job is to influence the brain. Like, if we're talking about influencing people, we're actually talking about influencing people's brains. Absolutely. So once I started, it was a few years ago that I started to look into neuroscience and understand it. And I was like, oh my goodness, I have a great responsibility to understand this, because it is my job to help leaders say the right things and get up and be the right person to help progress these issues and ideas. And I don't believe you cannot influence effectively and consistently without understanding neuroscience.
Exactly. So, and even if you understand it right now, unless you have extremely good leaders that are not going to listen to what people are telling them, but they care about the people, and what's good for the people. Because if the government doesn't care, I'm telling you, no one else does. Because they're trying to make profit and everything else and get likes and sell their products. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's part of being in a capitalistic society. But we are a social capitalism too. So we have to have the government, which we hope and trust are kind of representing the good of the people.
So I guess if we're talking to
so important.
If we're talking to government communicators, then I guess the first step is go out and start educating yourself about neuroscience.
Yes, and please use yourself for good.
Yes.
You have one life, and each of us have a choice about how we can live our life, how to use our life. For example, I know someone that just gave their kidney to help someone that they don't know live today. They had their operation today, right? Or you can just use your life and hack people and make them hurt each other, make them, upset with each other. You can, and as a government person, you have that choice too.
So and communicators are in a unique position that we actually, in this point of history, we actually can step up to this challenge. We can work with neuroscientists like you. We can understand it. And we actually are in a position to make a big difference.
Please use it for good, though. It's so easy. The easiest pathway right now, it's already happened, right? So it's all over Red Rover. People have used it for bad.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we wouldn't be having this conversation.
It actually was the first thing my lecturer said to me when I did my master's and I did persuading in public affairs. It was like a disclaimer. People throughout history have learnt this skill and used it for good, and they have used it for bad. Use it for good.
Well, everyone has that choice with their life, and it's like, how do you want to live your life? Well, it is an individual choice. But at the moment, I think, and I'm not trying to sound, on a high horse here. It's just that it's desperate.
Yeah.
Like people have, we've got mental health wards that don't have enough beds. We have 19 to 25-year-olds that are facing what we've left them. And I'm 55 and I feel incredibly embarrassed what I've left for my children. And I think it's embarrassing.
Let's move on to the next question because it will start to cover that. And I am conscious of time. And this is actually a really important question. And then we're talking about responsible leadership here. So as you said, this is unprecedented. It's the most overused word this year, but the most suitable to explain what's currently going on. So if it's unprecedented, that means all of us, government leaders, communicators, speechwriters, none of us have experience in this, in this situation right now. So, I think it's important to look to the research, to look back at history, to forge the way forward. And the Stockdale paradox is something that's been spoken about quite a lot this year. So it's based on the experience of US Admiral James Stockdale, who was a prisoner of war for 7.5 years in Vietnam. And he said the prisoners of war who were optimists, who thought they'd be out by Christmas, often didn't survive. And that's quite important for where we are right now with coronavirus, because we don't know if we're at the beginning of this crisis or if in Australia where we're doing quite well, if we're towards the end. So how important is it that our communication from leaders and governments is optimistic yet realistic?
That's a great way to finish this. So Viktor Frankl, very famous book. It was a survivor of the Holocaust, and what he focused on, which is very much what we're talking about, was his brain. And the thing you can actually control out of everything going forward, whether no matter, we don't know what's going to happen. So that uncertainty makes every part of the brain go off and you start to do crazy things. So the one thing you have control over is your brain health and fitness. And then no matter what happens going forward, you will have the capacity to look after yourself and your family. And what I mean by that, you don't really need very much. You just need to wake up in the morning and focus on 3 things you're grateful for. Look out into the sunrise and do your exercise and eat well as a start, as a foundation of your life. And that's a lifelong skill that will allow you to survive any pandemic, because the fitter you are, the less symptoms you have. It'll allow you to not react to what other people are telling you, because you understand that you have everything you need. You have legs that you can walk on and you have toes you can wiggle. And a lot of people don't have that. So I think the one thing that I've noticed from the pandemic is this responsibility and accountability we have to take care of ourselves and our family, and to recognize it's just the basic little things that make you happy. It's not the big overseas trips, even though that's wonderful and it's making us like really stressed out and all of that. It is our capacity, no matter where we are, whatever situation we find ourselves in, when you understand how the brain works and you can train it for yourself, it gives you this enormous capacity for resilience. As we talk about how do we survive uncertainty. So there's so much uncertainty in the world, and it's been driven by people that have been able to dichotomize the world and dehumanize the world. So if we want to rehumanize, and as David Attenborough says, rewild the world to survive over the next few decades, we have no other choice but to gain responsibility and accountability for our own mental health state, our brain health. And from that, everything radiates. And so we can then handle these uncertainties. So from a government communications leadership point of view, I understand the need. We have a great need for feeling some optimism right now, because it's been a really hard year for everybody. And that's what I meant by this mental health crisis unfolding. I know it, I see it. But then what do we do to help? So we need that rational approach that's somewhere in the middle. But I think that the more we can help people understand that they can get some health from just the smallest little things every day, will go a long way to help our country recover, because we're in a decade-long recovery at least. And so that it's like, you know, these are the small steps we can take. And I think government communications is the most essential force for good that we potentially have. But unfortunately, it's not being used like that at the moment. It's all about the win, and it's not about the governing. We've lost our old-fashioned parliament was for discussing issues after you were elected in. That the old parliamentary system's kind of gone. You know, so it'd be great to reinvent our humanness. And I think I can only see the way forward through communicators like yourself, leaders actually caring enough about that and becoming human again instead of robots and just relying on our animal instincts, you know.
Great. So it's really important that leaders and governments have absolutely optimistic and hopeful, but we do need to be really realistic with the situation we're in, and we should be communicating that realistically. Like we should be honest with that.
And I'd love to add here, I believe we're in a slip, slop, slap moment for mental health. We need a prevention strategy that's much like putting sunscreen on for skin cancer. We need these simple messages that go with this optimistic message, but understand and start talking about the brain as something, a magnificent organ that people can have health and fitness with.
Absolutely.
And if the leader doesn't understand that and is doing it, we can't expect the people to be doing it either.
Well, we're out of time, but thank you so much for joining me on this panel. I just, I think conversations like this are so important. There's so much speechwriters and communicators like me can learn from neuroscientists like you. And I really hope that our two professions work closely together as we navigate our way through this crisis and into the years ahead.
And that would be wonderful. And there's so much we can do. There's so much opportunity here. And we didn't go into very much depth because I think we're at
we didn't have very long.
We don't have long, but we had a point where we need a high-level discussion first.
Absolutely, absolutely. And this needs to be an ongoing discussion. I think we need to be talking about neuroscience and communication more frequently and to really spread that message far and wide. But I just want to say to everyone that's listening, thank you for joining us today at the GovComms Festival. And to listen to more incredible talks, please head back to the main stage. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having us.